The amber light above the Thesavari senior block moved before she finished reading. Saren Asheville set the message down. She did not look up from her tablet. The indicator had shifted from neutral gray to pale orange amber, and across the chamber, all 700 meters of it, built from mineral composites sourced from 14 separate star systems. That same amber was spreading from delegation seat to delegation seat like a stain finding the low points of a surface. She had watched this chamber for 14 years. She knew how damage spread. 580 civilizations were represented in this room. Earth was removing itself from the final count. Or rather, Earth was being removed. The distinction would matter later. She picked up her stylus, set it beside the tablet, opened a second window on her personal comm, and typed 11 words into a secured channel that bypassed the Conclave's monitoring relay entirely. She did not look up while she typed. She did not look up when she sent it. The vote was not finished. It did not need to be. What she did next is why Earth hasn't needed to ask permission since. Stay close. 9 years before the amber light moved, Saren Asheville was sitting in a transit station at the far edge of the Selvori corridor, eating something described as a protein composite that tasted like recycled polymer pressed into the shape of optimism. It smelled like heated coolant. The station's atmospheric processors were running at 60%, and the combination produced a specific kind of sensory experience she would later file under conditions under which significant decisions are made, because that is what she did with most things. She filed them. She had a form open on her tablet, the 43rd version of a petition she'd been drafting for 3 months. She had written and deleted 847 words since morning. She closed the petition, opened a different file, looked at the infrastructure maps she had been building for 11 months. The Conclave's deep space relay network was, in the technical sense, magnificent, 4 centuries old in its oldest sections. The Velkari knew their sections. The Ashari knew the junctions their trade depended on. The Selvori monitored their own corridor with philosophical detachment and reported anomalies only when they felt morally certain. The anomaly was not itself a form of certainty. Nobody had a map of the whole. Saren had spent 11 months building one. She understood for the first time, clearly, without comfortable ambiguity, that the petition she had just closed was never going to produce the outcome she had been filing it toward. Not because the argument was wrong, because the system she was filing it into was not designed to produce that outcome, regardless of the quality of the argument. There is a difference between believing in a process and understanding one. Her mother had believed. 14 years at the kitchen table, filling in boxes on forms that asked the same questions in slightly different configurations, attaching documentation that had been reviewed and cleared and placed into the institutional equivalent of a room with no doors. Her mother had died still processing. Saren had not become a diplomat because she believed in the process. She had become one because she understood it. One produced petitions, the other produced maps. She finished the food without tasting it. She opened a new document. She began writing something that was not a petition. The vaulted conclave's main chamber had been designed to make anyone standing in it feel the weight of everything that had happened there before them. Saren had measured the ceiling herself in her 3rd week with a portable surveying unit borrowed from the maintenance team. The proportions created a specific ratio of perceived height to actual height that the Thesavari called institutional awe, and that Saren had filed under psychological leverage, architectural variety. She had been in her assigned seat for 14 years. She knew which atmospheric scrubbers ran warm in the afternoon sessions. She knew the Vethani commerce delegate always left early on days when the vote was already determined. He had somewhere else to be, something more efficient to do, and he had the political instinct of a species that calculated outcomes in advance and saw no value in witnessing conclusions they had already modeled. He had not left early today. That was how she had known 3 weeks ago that the date had been set. High Arbiter Kavith Ern occupied the raised platform with the deliberate stillness of a Thesavari elder who had spent 6 decades cultivating it. His skin was gray-scaled with an iridescent undertone at the jaw that deepened when he was managing something he had not prepared for. In 14 years, she had learned to read the jaw. Right now, the jaw was neutral. He had prepared for this. The charges were read in the measured voice of someone who had rehearsed sounding reluctant. Earth's rate of military development, never precisely defined, consistently cited. Earth's refusal to submit biotech research to Conclave oversight, phrased as a refusal, though Earth had offered disclosure 3 separate times, simply not surrender. And the Sora Station incident, described in language so carefully constructed that no individual or governing body would ever be specifically accountable for what had actually happened there. Saren had a 51-minute audio recording of what had actually happened there. She had been carrying it for 7 years. She touched the stylus cap with her left thumb without looking at it. The amber spread, 560, 570. The Selvori abstained as always. She had once told their senior delegate that philosophical certainty aversion was a comfortable position for a species that didn't require other civilizations' votes to survive. He had not spoken to her directly since. The cost of that had been 0. 580. The vote was complete. The motion carries. Earth is formally placed under protective isolation. Trade sanctions will take effect within 1 standard cycle. Travel restrictions are immediate. A corrective period of no less than 60 standard cycles is hereby imposed. The chamber released a sound through 580 bodies, not uniform, but something that traveled through every delegation differently. The specific acoustic texture of relief translated across a dozen physiologies. One delegation near the northern tier produced a harmonic overtone that meant she had learned after 3 years, the conclave equivalent of finally. She noted it, filed it, picked up her tablet. The calm notification arrived 90 seconds after she had sent the message. Green light. All 38 nodes active. 0 interference from conclave monitoring systems. She closed the screen. She sat with the stillness that does not come from calm. It comes from knowing exactly what you do next. Myra Olin was near the eastern entrance as Saren crossed the floor. Earth's chief legal advisor, a title that meant she had spent 3 years preparing a legal position that no court had yet agreed to hear. She was carrying coffee that had gone cold. Her jacket was slightly crooked. She raised 2 fingers as Saren passed. Confirmed. Saren gave her 1 nod. The Thesavari diplomatic liaison caught up with her in the outer corridor 2 minutes after the vote closed. He had prepared a comprehensive statement covering transition support, liaison offices, community-funded adjustment periods, mediation services for species re-entering the review process. Saren closed her tablet. "Here is the thing," she said. He paused mid-sentence. His jaw showed a flicker of iridescence, a tell she had learned to read across ranks, not just in earn. You just voted to exile a species that has been building a separate infrastructure layer for 9 years. She let that sit. 1 breath. You did not exile us. You freed us from the waiting list. The prepared statement left his face completely. What replaced it was the visible recalculation of a person who has discovered that the map they were carrying does not describe the terrain they are standing in. He was a senior official. He had delivered difficult outcomes to difficult parties across a long career. He had not, in that career, encountered a party that had been waiting for the outcome. Her tablet pulsed. She glanced at it. All 38 nodes. Active, clean, 0 flags from conclave monitoring infrastructure. They had not noticed yet. The escort caught up with her at the junction. 6 conclave enforcement officers, standard formation. Their lead officer informed her, with genuine professional courtesy, that Earth's diplomatic credentials had been suspended effective immediately. "Copy that," Saren said. She kept walking. Outer Corridor 9 had been designed to feel longer than its 380 meters. The ceiling dropped incrementally toward the transit hub, creating a subconscious experience of available space narrowing with each step. She had measured the drop on her 3rd week. She filed most things. Petra Vane's message had arrived with the others, all 38, 0 flags. Saren typed back, "Long enough." Petra was the kind of person who did not travel. She had a lab, a team, and a relationship with productive time that made transit feel like bleeding out. When Saren had first brought her the infrastructure maps, 11 months of relay network data, every corridor and junction and redundancy gap that no single species had ever mapped, Petra had looked at them for 6 minutes without speaking and said, in the flat, precise tone she reserved for things she had already decided, "This is buildable. What's the budget?" The budget had been, by any reasonable measure, inadequate. She had gone back to her lab with 7 engineers and built it anyway. There had been 2 years when the work looked like it might not be completable in time, node fabrication running behind schedule, an authentication protocol requiring 3 full rebuilds, a 6-month period when 2 of the 7 engineers had to be replaced, and the institutional knowledge loss set them back further than the calendar showed. Petra had not reported any of this as a crisis. She had reported it as a sequence of problems that were being solved, in the flat, precise tone of someone who considered the difference between a solvable problem and a solved one to be primarily a matter of elapsed time. 8 years later, 2 words, "It's ready." Saren had read those words at her desk on a quiet orbital evening and felt something she had been careful not to name. Currency you have not yet confirmed is real should not be spent. She had filed the feeling below the operational layer, where it would not interfere with the work. 14 meters from the secondary wing junction, the lead officer's comm activated. He listened for 4 seconds. Something reorganized in his posture. "Ambassador Asheville, the convocation has issued an emergency recall. High Arbiter Ern has requested your immediate return. The stated basis is an infrastructure concern." Saren looked at him. He was doing his job correctly. He clearly felt the situation had moved past what his job had prepared him for, which was not something she held against him. "Copy that," she said. She turned around. The escort reformed without a word and moved with her in the opposite direction. She gave them full credit for the professionalism. She had spent 14 years learning this building, so that she would never be made small by it. Through the chamber doors she could feel, through the mineral floor, the changed acoustic signature of 580 delegations that had been settling into the comfortable weight of a concluded decision, and were now doing something else. Not settled, moving. She put her hand flat on the door for exactly 1 second. Then she pushed it open. Arbiter Ern was standing. He did not stand during sessions that were not in formal record. His jaw iridescence was elevated, not dramatically, but enough. He had been managing something since approximately 6 minutes after the vote closed. Saren walked to the center floor, not to the envoy's bench. That seat was no longer technically hers. She walked to the speaker's position. She had never addressed the chamber from the speaker's position. She stood on it. "Ambassador Asheville," Ern said, "our infrastructure monitoring has flagged a significant anomaly across the deep space relay network. 38 new relay nodes have registered active status across the major trade corridors. The authentication layer on 11 primary junctions has been redirected through Earth-registered infrastructure. We are requesting an explanation." "Of course," she said. She had planned the sequence carefully. Each disclosure would land differently. The first would produce confusion. The second would produce calculation. The third would produce something she did not have a clean word for in any language she knew. Earth has been mapping the Conclave's deep space relay network for 11 years. Every corridor, every junction, every traffic pattern and redundancy gap. We identified 38 critical intersections, the points where the highest volume of interstellar trade and communication crosses. And over the following 9 years, we built new relay nodes at each one. The chamber was quiet, in open interstellar space, which falls under no territorial jurisdiction, registered under the Conclave's own standard infrastructure classification system, where they appear in the directories as generic relay additions, unattributed, unremarkable, and until 26 minutes ago, completely overlooked. She let that sit. She watched the room absorb it. It violated no law on the community registry. Earth's legal team has verified the complete construction record against every applicable statute. All 38 nodes meet community infrastructure classification standards. Myra Olin had arrived near the chamber entrance, jacket still slightly crooked, tablet open. She raised 2 fingers. "Ready." No legal mechanism available to this chamber can compel Earth to disable, surrender, or transfer operation of those nodes. She let that sentence reach every corner of the room before she continued. The Vethani pharmaceutical distribution network routes through Corridor 7. Our node there is now the primary authentication point for all traffic on that route. The Ashari commercial shipping network depends on junctions 2, 9, and 14. We have operational nodes at all three. The Selvori communication corridor runs through Sector 40. Our node there is the most powerful unit in that zone by a factor of 3. The Vethani commercial representatives had begun receiving communications from their home offices. She could read the reorganization in their body language as the responses arrived, the specific posture adjustment of institutions, calculating the cost of two different outcomes against each other. The message from their home offices was not difficult to interpret. Do not disconnect the nodes. Their supply chain mathematics had spoken more clearly than any position paper. The Marnathi data relay uses junctions 21 and 32. We cover both. The Trade Federation's primary cargo corridor runs through junction 18. Our node there went live clean. She looked across the full chamber. Earth's legal advisor has the complete regulatory record and is prepared to review it with any scholars this chamber wishes to appoint. Ern set his tablet down with great care. His jaw iridescence deepened. Ambassador Asheville, what is Earth proposing? Saren walked to the arbiter's table and set the data chip in front of him. Earth is not proposing anything. Earth is delivering terms. The distinction matters. I would ask this chamber to keep it in mind throughout the rest of this conversation. Ern called a 30-minute recess. She stood in the antechamber and drank water that tasted faintly of mineral composite and thought about 11 years of mapping, about a transit station that smelled like heated coolant, about a woman at a kitchen table filling in boxes with careful handwriting, with the specific quality of faith required to keep going back to that table after the first year, the third year, the 8th year, and find it still worth doing. Her mother had died still processing. Saren had not become a diplomat because she believed in the process. She set down the water, straightened her jacket, walked back to the doors. Ern returned with 6 Thesavari legal scholars and 2 representatives from the Conclave Standards Authority. The senior scholar delivered a 16-minute argument, systematic, historically grounded, arriving finally at the position that Earth's construction, while not explicitly prohibited, potentially violated the spirit of the infrastructure cooperation framework. Saren waited until he had finished completely. She did not move while he spoke. She did not touch the stylus. The spirit of the framework was written 2 centuries ago by species who had not yet made first contact with Earth. Earth was not consulted on any of the foundational documents your team is currently citing. We were presented with those documents as conditions of a membership application that has produced no membership after 40 years of active processing. She nodded toward Myra. Myra stepped forward and placed a physical document in front of the senior scholar, then another, then 6 more, precisely stacked, with the contained energy of a person doing exactly the work they had spent 3 years building toward. Legal analysis of every precedent cited, Myra said, with specific annotation to the sections that do not apply, because Earth was not a signatory to the originating agreements. All verified and timestamped. The third document references Section 17 of the Conclave's own Infrastructure Development Charter, which provides direct positive legal support for independent node construction in open interstellar space, not subject to any existing territorial claim. The senior scholar looked at the stack. He looked at Myra. He looked at the stack again. Myra picked up her coffee, which was still cold, and turned to look at the middle distance with the expression of someone finally doing the work in front of the people it was designed for. The legal argument ended. The Ashari senior delegate rose before Ern had formally reconvened. He was large, physically expressive in the specific manner of a culture where expressiveness was the primary communication register. He said Earth's unilateral activation of 38 relay nodes constituted a destabilizing action under the community's emergency security protocols. He framed it as capability, not declaration. He sat down. The word he had chosen for destabilizing, in a Shari primary, carried an overtone that mapped approximately to "we are authorized to correct this." The translation relay smoothed it out. Saren had studied the Ashari communication system for 6 years. She had not missed it. She reached into her jacket pocket. The gesture was identical to every other reach she made. The Ashari delegate could not distinguish this reach from any other. She found the file she had indexed 7 years ago and never moved. She pressed play. 12 seconds of audio. 2 voices, Ashari primary, translated in real time. A boarding action. An unarmed Earth research vessel near Sora's station. A senior officer confirming in the flat operational register of routine procedure that the boarding had proceeded according to plan. She stopped the playback. The chamber was very quiet. The full recording is 51 minutes. Earth has held it for 7 years. It currently exists on 6 separate servers across 2 solar systems. Section 4 of Earth's terms addresses the official record correction for the Sora Station incident. She looked at the Ashari delegation directly. "I would recommend reviewing Section 4 carefully before this delegation makes any additional statements." The Ashari senior delegate was completely still, not the practiced stillness of a Thesavari elder, the specific, deliberate stillness of a large, physically expressive species choosing, with considerable effort, not to express anything at all. He was fighting his own physiology and winning barely, and the cost was visible in every line of him. He made no further statement. Saren turned back to the arbiter's table. "The terms are complete. I am willing to clarify any section whose language requires it. That is different from modification. I want to be precise about that difference." She set the data chip in front of Ern, with the same motion she would have used to set down a glass of water. "Earth is not proposing anything. Earth is delivering terms." She stepped back to the speaker's position. What followed was 43 minutes she would not describe to anyone who asked, because the accurate description would not land the way the experience did. It was not a victory. It was a very long, very careful reckoning. 580 civilizations that had spent decades refining the art of institutional negotiation applied everything they knew to a person who had spent 14 years learning exactly how they applied it. They knew how to redirect pressure without appearing to redirect it, how to move a conversation sideways without the other party fully understanding the conversation had moved. What they had not encountered before now was someone who had watched them do it long enough to recognize each technique before the setup was complete. She answered questions, clarified language, declined twice proposed modifications to Section 7, and explained both times exactly why the proposed language change would functionally reverse the intent of the clause without appearing to do so. The first time, the proposing delegate seemed genuinely surprised she had caught it. The second time, he did not seem surprised at all. Near the end of the 6th hour, a young outer system Thesavari delegate asked for the floor. He was wide-eyed in the way a species only is when something has genuinely caught them without preparation. He stood with the careful formality of someone making their first formal statement in a chamber that had been functioning since before his civilization had FTL travel. "Ambassador Ashvale, why did you not simply ask for all of this years ago before all of this became necessary, before the infrastructure, before the recording, before today?" The chamber was very quiet. Saren looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 200 correspondence chains, about 2 security assessment reports that had cleared Earth completely and been classified before they could enter the formal record, about a 51-minute audio file held for 7 years, because the official documentation described a military boarding action on an unarmed civilian research vessel as a navigational misunderstanding in contested space, about a woman at a kitchen table at 11 in the evening, filling in every required box, attaching every required document, sending it through the correct channel, and then going to sleep and getting up the next morning and beginning the work of waiting, with the specific faith of someone who cannot afford not to believe it, that the system was designed to respond. Her mother had died still processing. Her left thumb found the stylus cap without looking. "We did ask," Saren said. "We asked for 30 years." She held his gaze. Then we stopped asking. Something moved through his expression, an assumption being updated. He chose, rather than resist the update, to simply make it. He did not speak again. The vote moved through the chamber section by section, indicator lights shifting from neutral to the specific shade of blue, the conclave system used for formal ratification. She watched it spread across 580 delegations, the same geometry as the amber that had preceded it, the same directional pattern, the same incremental claiming of seats, the same shape, the inverse color, 569 in favor, 11 abstentions, 0 opposing. She stood on the speaker's floor and felt something pass through her that she was not going to name, not in this room, not in front of 580 observers recalibrating their institutional understanding of what Earth was, and what a seat at this table was now going to cost them going forward. She noted it, filed it, would carry it the way she carried everything else. "Thank you," she said to the chamber. The words were accurate. That was all they needed to be. Myra handed her a coffee near the exit without speaking. It was cold. Saren drank it without comment. At the junction where Corridor 9 branched, Saren held up one hand. Myra stopped beside her. 11 seconds of silence. The ceiling's calculated gradient dropped around them. The atmospheric processors ran their low hum. Then she straightened. She opened her comm. Briggs answered on the second pulse. "Done," she said. A pause. "How does it feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Like being right about something for 14 years, she said, "and finally being in a room where right is the only thing that matters." "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that tracks." She ended the call. Within the first month, 14 species sent formal bilateral inquiry packets directly to Earth Station, not through the Conclave's community mediation framework. Direct contacts, species to species, outside the institutional channels that had, until 26 days ago, been the only channels available. Outer system civilizations, mostly. Species that had been in the chamber when the amber spread, and the infrastructure disclosures arrived, and the vote reversed, and had drawn their own conclusions about what it meant to build a relationship with a civilization that had spent 9 years constructing leverage, while no one was paying attention. Saren read every inquiry personally. She flagged one as a Vethani commercial interest operating under a different entity name, identical contract structure, certain clauses modified, the underlying architecture unchanged. She sent it back unsigned. "We have seen this structure before. Please contact Myra Olin's office." It turned out to be a legitimate independent shipping operation that hadn't fully read what they were signing. The follow-up went better. Petra Vane arrived on day 64 with the hollowed-out look of someone who had spent 28 hours in a transit pod, and most of them working. When she appeared in the receiving bay, Saren understood the visit was not casual. They ate in the station cafeteria. The food had improved, better supply chain access, corridor routing that ran through infrastructure Earth managed now. A small irony she acknowledged without making anything of it. Petra set her fork down. Node 12 was degrading faster than projected. The pharmaceutical corridor was running 35% above usage models. They needed an upgrade or a second unit. "Add the second unit," Saren said. "I need authorization and a budget allocation. Send the specs to Myra. She'll process it this week." Petra was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Saren a beat longer than logistics required, the extra second of attention she reserved for things she had decided were worth the words. "Are you doing all right?" The question carried weight the words did not. "I'm working," Saren said. Petra accepted that without adjusting it. She had always known the difference between an answer and a navigation around one, and when the navigation was more honest than the alternative. She did not push. She left the next morning on the early transit. Saren stood at the observation window and watched the pod disconnect from the dock. She stayed a few seconds after it cleared. Then she went back to her desk. Director Veen Salith arrived on day 78 with 4 delegates and a 6-page agenda. They covered relay node policy formalization, bilateral agreement governance structures, the Sora's station incident reclassification, and the two suppressed security assessment reports that had cleared Earth and been held out of the formal record. On the assessment reports, Saren stopped him mid-sentence. Those go public, all of them, unredacted. The people who were on that vessel and the families of everyone involved deserve an accurate record. That is not a policy position I'm willing to negotiate. He wrote something on his notepad. The room was quiet enough that the pen made a sound against the paper. He looked at what he had written. Then he looked up. "All right," he said. Before he reached the door, he stopped. "It will take time, for people back home, for the institutions, for the way people understand what has changed. It'll need time to become something they can actually live inside, not just something that happened." "I know," she said. He left. She sat alone in the conference room and thought about a woman at a table with a form in front of her, filling in every required box, attaching every required document, sending it through the correct channel. Going back the next year and the year after that with the considered faith of a person who has decided the cost of stopping is higher than the cost of continuing. The forms go into the drawers. The drawers do not open. She fills out the next one. She sat with that for as long as it needed. Then she stood up. Day 91. A territorial boundary dispute she had been mediating for 3 weeks. 2 species with overlapping infrastructure claims they had been treating as zero-sum when the underlying interests were almost entirely compatible. The obstacle was not the resources. It was the framing. She threaded it, slowly, and then quickly once both delegations began to see the same door. By the end of the session, they had agreed to a provisional shared infrastructure framework that neither had proposed because neither had been looking for it. They left with the energy of delegations that had arrived prepared for a longer fight and found a different exit. The Ashari senior delegate had been watching from the observation tier for 2 hours and 14 minutes. His delegation had no stake in the session. He was simply there, watching. After the chamber cleared, he crossed the floor and stopped at the cultural interval his species maintained as deliberate respect. "The framework you used, the shared stewardship model, that is not a conclave standard approach. No, it comes from an Earth organizational system developed for multi-party resource disputes. We've used it domestically for about 60 years. It doesn't always work, but when underlying interests are genuinely compatible and the obstacle is framing, it tends to. You have other frameworks like it." "Not a question." "Several." He was quiet. "The Ashari have an internal dispute, 2 member systems, 11 years unresolved. The Conclave's standard arbitration process has not produced an outcome both systems will accept. Send the file to Myra Olin. She'll assess whether Earth's bilateral arbitration framework is applicable. If it is, she'll send you our terms and a proposed process timeline." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression, not gratitude, not quite respect. The specific, considered acknowledgement of a person who has been required to update a significant assumption and has chosen, rather than resist the update, to simply make it. "You argue like people who expect to lose," he said. "Habit," she said. He left. The afternoon session began at the second bell. She picked up the stylus. She opened the first file. This was the work, and she was here to do it, and that was the only sentence that had ever needed to be true. Nobody tells you what getting a seat actually means. It means you stop being the thing they wipe their boots on before they sit down. The table doesn't change. You do.